further, it's a recording in progress. That's great. I'm going to apologize again for throwing Karen Plantier under the bus. I thought that it was a host issue, and it turned out to be a heavenly host issue. We didn't have the right Zoom link. So sorry again, Karen. Having said that, couple little pieces of housekeeping before we get into talking about the school budgets and other business of the night. I'm going to move one item out of order because Mo is sitting there, and rather than waiting until the end of the meeting to introduce our new member, Mo Barocas, because he is now sworn in. See that hand go up like that? That was his swearing in hand right there. So he was sworn in earlier this week, and he is now a fully fledged, full-time committed member of the Finance Committee. So many of you know Mo already, so a hearty welcome from the Finance Committee to our newest member. And we are, for the first time in my experience, I believe we are fully staffed. 9 full-time members and 2 alternates, which is great because we shouldn't ever have a problem with a quorum again, ever, which is nice. So there's that. One other thing I just wanted to mention, as you know, I try to run a pretty loose meeting because I think it optimizes discussion. It's much better than, you know, Mr. Chair through you kind of stuff, in my opinion. Having said that, however, I think there are times that we rush to get motions in before we've had a chance to get closure on discussions. It's a subjective opinion on my part, but it is my opinion. And I looked up Robert's Rules of Orders. I actually did that for the very first time to actually see what is supposed to happen. And the way it's supposed to work in theory is that anyone who wants to make a motion asks the chair if they can make a motion, and the chair has the option of saying not yet or no or whatever. I think this is a discretionary thing, but I would appreciate in the future that if you want to make a motion that we do it that way, because if we haven't finished a discussion, to me, it's less disruptive than having to fight through whether we should make a motion and whether we should take a vote or not. I will not delay, I promise, for any great length of time if we're in the middle of a discussion. But the other option for the person making the motion is to challenge the chair's decision and have a vote on whether it should be overridden, which seems to me like maybe over the top. But I just want you to know that we'll still try to be as respectful as always. But if you want to make a motion, please say, yep, I want to make a motion, and then we'll see how it goes. And that's it.
May I respond?
Yes, you may.
Okay. The reason I believe that people do that, and I hope they don't, is that I think people tend to overkill a subject. And this is a long meeting. All of our FinCom meetings are, and I would hope that people would just say the necessary and then allow the meeting to go on, rather than judge for yourself if what you say is actually moving things along, or if you just enjoy hearing yourself talk, because that's what happens a lot.
I think that's a good point, and I would retort that 90% of the time I think people kind of do self-edit, or we edit each other. Someone will say to another person, "Hey, you know, let's cut it." But what I want to avoid is cutting people off by making a motion, getting a quick second, and having to go to a vote when we may not have finished the discussion. And I don't think that's going to happen very often. I really don't. And I am more than willing for anyone to challenge my opinion. If I think, gee, we should talk a little bit more, you're more than welcome to say, hey, we've done enough. And we'll have, you know, we'll be adults in theory. But, you know, I like your eyes went to the sky on that one. Yeah, maybe we will, maybe we won't. Okay, having said that, one last point of housekeeping. I added a bit to the agenda a couple of days ago to have a quick discussion about our warrant review and upcoming votes and where we stand on what's happening with town meeting and all. It will not be an in-depth discussion, but I think for those who may not be fully aware of what's been going on, I can provide a little bit of information tonight and then a great deal more at our next meeting when we will be finalizing our warrant reviews. I hope our warrant recommendations, which would be the goal. And that's it. I'd like to welcome Mary Beth Rodman, Tom Conrad, Giovanna Venditti. I see you've got a G at the end of your name. Clever. These are represented. I don't know if anyone else on the line is a representative of the school. There are some names here I'm not fully familiar with, but you would know. And they are here tonight to help us understand the school budgets, the FY22 school budgets. And I don't know that an apology is necessarily in order exactly. Normally, in a normal year, we would have talked to you guys at least a month ago ahead of the warrant going to press, which it's already done. And we would have had a better idea of what the school's budget process and finals were before we ever had to think about voting on the operations budget and so on. But that this is not a normal year, and many of you know why. So to some degree, this is a formality. You've already crafted your budgets. I saw them in Appendix A, or at least Wellfleet's share in Appendix A of the warrant. And it's a little bit like, closing the barn after the cow has been out and carousing for a while. But hopefully everybody understands that this has been an unusual year. The other thing is that Tom Conrad's on the line, and Tom won't be on the line very much longer, because talking about going out to pasture, the cow going out and then closing the barn door, there you go. So I hope we'll have the opportunity to say good luck and well done and so on. The first item on the agenda, as always, is to accept the minutes from the previous meeting, the April 28th meeting with the other Zoom link. I don't know, I hope you've had a chance to look at it. If anybody has any comments, questions, or whatever about those meeting minutes, this would be a good time to bring them up. They are a little dense because we were reviewing the wastewater stuff, and that is what it is. It's a lot of science and a lot of technicality. So I'm not sure I even understand the meeting minutes, but there they are.
I read them. I would move the minutes.
All right, thank you. I've got a motion to move, and second?
I second.
Thanks. I will just do a
second.
roll call. I say aye. Woody?
Aye.
Kathy? Mo?
I don't think that I can vote on last meeting's minutes.
Well, I guess that's true technically, but you were there. So anyway, Linda?
She
Aye.
already voted.
Jeff?
Oh, no.
Aye.
Bob?
Aye.
I see something that says iPhone. I don't know who that is.
Sarah.
Sarah?
Aye.
You were not at the last meeting, so that's okay. So we have
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 nothing to accept the minutes. Thank you for that. So the agenda tonight starts with Mary Beth Rodman, the fabulous Mary Beth Rodman.
Wow.
Well, listen, I might as well throw some bones out here considering all the disclaimers about why you guys are coming in late and why, in a sense, we're late to the party here, but you are fabulous. So
Thank you.
I don't know if your budget
Feeling
is
mutual.
to be determined.
It's been quite an unusual year, but I could not be more proud. The fact that our kids were in school every single day, full days of school, and we're super proud of that. So would you like me to just start my presentation, Fred?
I would, and
Mhm.
let me just say, relative to the presentation, I hope everybody has the full complement of budget documents that were distributed by Karen on the 21st. There are a bunch of them, as there always are. And I guess what we're really looking for is, to some degree, the highlights, because if I'm not mistaken, almost all of the budgets look like magically they've increased by 2.5%, almost 2.50%, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't think there's going to be a lot of concern about the size of the budgets. I would be interested in knowing what kind of guidance you had and how you
Sure.
kind of drove to that magic number. But you know, without a too deep a dive, it would be useful to know what the process was and what the major issues you dealt with were.
Well, first of all, we had 3 full-time educators that announced their retirement. We had another full-time employee, our head custodian, who announced his retirement as well. So there was savings there. However, we did have to add an additional grade 3 teacher because there is good news that we are confirmed at 25 third grade students, and the policy is the class splits once you get to the number 25. And we actually just had another family call that they work for the Park Service and they're coming from Alaska, and they have 2 children coming into the school, one being a third grader. So it looks like we're going to be up to 26 kiddos. So that's pretty exciting. My speech language pathologist has begun her own business. So she asked to be reduced from 70% to 50%. And I was able to make that work and make sure that all the students that do receive that service will receive that service. And we also use some of our funds to prepay for next year. For example, we used FY22 circuit breaker funds totaling over $30,000, and they've been applied to prepay the special ed preschool tuition, which is account number 4088. We used our school choice funds totaling $10,000 to prepay non-instructional technology as well. We had some substantial decreases in the costs associated with the Cape Cod Collaborative. Those are reflected in the budget, and many of the line items were able to be level funded. We even level funded our free after-school childcare program. So we level funded that from FY20 because we didn't have it this year. We were unable to have that. So in summary, the regular day portion of the budget increases by 8.27%, whereas the special ed portion of the budget decreases by minus 11.58%, bringing the budget in at 2.5.
So when the special ed part of the budget decreases, my understanding is, at least from conversations we've had before, is that is kind of incidental in a sense to the number of kids who are coming through the system, who are classified as special ed. Has there been a change in the classification system, for better or for worse, in how a special ed student is defined that affects that aspect of your enrollment?
So it impacts depending on the degree of services that the child needs and whether the placement in the general ed school is appropriate or not. If a student has significant disabilities, there could be the recommendation for out-of-district placement. And that's where the costs start to rise at about $100,000 per student. And we now have a student who is not attending the collaborative program. So there was that savings there as well. So that was one of our big decreases going from last year to this year and into next year.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have questions? Other questions?
And the circuit breaker fund also is the reimbursement. It's a very difficult, complicated, complex formula that takes into account 3 years worth of our intensive special needs students. and we get reimbursement for that. So those are the funds that we use to prepay. Another special ed line item.
I apologize if I missed it while you were presenting, but the big dollar decrease in special ed out of district transportation, is that again a function of fewer students?
Correct.
Okay.
And we may, always see that ebb and flow, that up and down, depending on who moves into the district. And so this happens to be a time where the numbers are lower.
Yeah, and I remember a few years ago when they were higher.
Right.
And-
Yeah, it went up that year. It went up 15%.
Mhm.
And most of that percentage was intensive special needs, which means the increase happened because it was either the recommendation for out of district placement, or it required an additional staff member, such as an educational assistant, in addition to the teacher.
Okay. Any questions at all for Mary Beth? I mean, that was an economical presentation. It was very,
Thank you.
you might get out before the sun sets.
Well, quickly, it's going down.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Question. Any trouble replacing those retirees?
No, if somebody tells the principal early enough, meaning late winter, very early spring, and we get the postings out immediately, that's when you are able to sort of go through a very robust pool of candidates. And so we were able to hire really tremendous new talent coming out. And I feel like I have pilfered from the Monomoy Regional School District, because they seem to be in flux, and these young teachers were unsure of positions next year. So they started to look for positions elsewhere. And,
Great.
and they're wonderful. Yes, thank you.
Mary Beth,
Yes.
this doesn't relate to the operations budget per se, but someone asked me a question. Last year you had a capital item, and this does more generally, I think, apply to the management of the elementary school. There was a capital item to enhance the playground,
Yes.
and it got withdrawn, I think, because of COVID concerns and some question about whether there would be normal school and that sort of thing.
No, what happened is that we were not anticipating that we would need to put in a fire suppression system. So it then got moved by a year. We were then supposed to take the cladding around the building and all of the trim work. We were going to break that up into 2 years for replacement. And my head custodian had said that it got to a point where it has to be a priority all in 1 year. So the fire suppression system bumped the playground. The outside structure of the building needs to be replaced, so it bumped the playground again.
Okay. I guess the more general question I had is, as you look forward to this coming fall,
Mhm.
with all those bumps, so I
Mhm.
assume we're going to see all of those as capital requests next year, FY '23.
So the playground got bumped to 24 as a result. Mhm.
Are you anticipating a more or less normal school year with regular type attendance, regular type activities in the school?
Yes. Yes, so the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education will not be allowing remote as an option. So students will all be coming back. So we currently have 96 students in the building. We have 15 kids who are not in the building that are still accessing remote, and they will all be coming back. We have 11 children that are graduating from grade 5. We have additional kids coming now into grade 3, and we have confirmed 20 incoming kindergarten students. So I'm thinking we'll be up about 110.
Okay. Jeff, you had a question?
One quick question. You hear anecdotally that a lot of people are moving to towns like Wellfleet, and I'm curious if we are seeing, or if we should anticipate an increase in the student body in the next couple of years, if you're seeing anything.
We saw, Jeff, an increase this year because of the pandemic. People had come to their Wellfleet house or to live with family, out of state. And some people are returning to their hometowns, their home states. Others have decided to stay. So I don't anticipate an influx of people outside of what we experienced this year.
Mo, is that a question or just pointing to your head? I have one other question, I think, and just this. Line item 4037, salaries for guidance and counseling has decreased by 23%. Are you anticipating, and I guess one of the questions is why, but the second part would be, as you bring kids back into the school, I would think maybe your guidance or your counseling costs might go up, or at least the time spent with parents and children as they reacclimate to the school.
No, she's staying with us. She's paid out of 2 accounts. And so it just shifted in terms of where her counseling and where her testing is happening.
Oh, okay.
So there really isn't a savings there. She's still at 80%, just as she was this year.
All right, thanks. That makes sense. I have no other questions. Anyone else? If not, we can say thank you, Mary Beth. And it is just right before dark, so.
Well done.
Well done by you.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Stay well.
Which brings us to Giovanna. There are many budgets. Do you have a preference in terms of how you want to attack them or present them?
I was going to look at the region operating budget, which details all of the various line item budgets, the middle school, the high school, and I was going to touch upon how we're able to keep those budgets at 2.5%, similar to what Mary Beth presented in hers, and just give an oversight, unless you want me to.
No, I actually, I think looking at the region budget is a good place to start. That's the one that says FY22 region operating budget.
No, it's the 3-page document that has all of those budgets together.
That's what I mean.
Okay, yeah, that one there.
It says expenses and income on the first page.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that looks like a good summary, at least for starters, a good summary page.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to start. The middle school and the high school, even though we had increases in the proposed fiscal 22 budget compared to fiscal 21, we were able to keep those budgets at 2.5% increase. And again, we were able to, we had quite a few retirements. We also had some positions that are ending at the end of fiscal 21 that we did not replace in fiscal 22. So savings in normal attrition, positions not being replaced, retirements. We had several retirements in the teachers, the ed assistants. We also had other school psychologists that's leaving at the end of the year and replacement. So we were able to maintain those budgets in 2.5% increases for each of them. We do have a reduction in the region only budget, and that is primarily due to the number of out-of-district placements that we aren't happening, or the students have aged out or moved on to another district. So we had some savings there. We also had substantial savings in the health insurance line item because of the small increase, and then the premium holiday, 1-month premium holiday. So that helped us tremendously in the region only budget. And then the central office was up slightly. That was up 4.20%, and that's due to the region share of the central office budget is greater than the elementaries, and that's all based on the enrollment as of October 1st for that calculation. So overall, the expense side, we're only up 1.45% compared to last year's budget. Any questions on the expense side?
Yeah, one thing, if you could just make clear to a few members of the committee who are relatively new to this type of presentation, if you could just sort of thumbnail what the region-only budget and the region share of the central office budget is relative to the high school and the middle school, so that they understand what's actually involved in that, in those budgets.
The region-only budget are expenses that pertain just to the high school, the middle school, and parts of just those items. And for example, what's in the region-only budget is the benefit piece, OPEB contribution, health insurance, retirement contribution to Barnstable County. We have the transportation costs in there. There's professional development that's region-based. And so those expenses are allotted just to the region. We have the charter school expense, the school choice expense. We also have the out-of-district residential placements for special education, as well as the Cape Cod Collaborative expenses and related transportation costs, all pertaining to the region. In the central office piece, all of the region, as well as the elementary schools, share in their portion of any costs related to central office. So the central office would be the administration piece, which includes the superintendent, the business office, human resources, payroll, special education director, IT director, IT staff, materials and supplies, anything that we bill out to the region and the member towns for costs associated with running the district-wide, including all the elementaries.
Okay, thank you. That was very helpful.
Okay. Now the income section, we looked at what we anticipate receiving in state-based aid, and we budget very frugal. We're very frugal, and we don't we take things very cautiously. And so we budgeted based upon the guidance that we received from the state, with a small increase in aid, which includes the $30 per student for next year. We also looked at the charter school aid. We had an uptick in charter school aid in fiscal 21, and the state changed the formula for reimbursement. So you'll see an increase in the amount that we're anticipating in fiscal 22. So that went up almost $241,000 compared to what we've been budgeting in the last several years. We also level funded the state transportation aid. The amount received from Truro and P-Town, we reach out to them when we're going through the budget process and ask them how many students they anticipate coming to Nauset in the upcoming school year. And there's a decrease there because the number of students that they anticipate coming has been reduced. And we also looked at what the current numbers are, and they are reduced as well. So you see a big reduction there, about 238,000. We also looked at the elementary assessments for therapists, and that we bill to the elementary schools, and that's all based on need. And so there's a slight increase there, about $34,000. We also looked at the estimated receipts, and those are receipts that we get from interest on our savings, any other miscellaneous income, the Medicaid receipts. And we looked at what's trending this year. And as you well know, the interest rates have dropped substantially. So we're not seeing that level of interest income that we've seen in the past. So we reduced that accordingly based on what we're currently receiving and projecting for this year. And the transfer from E&D, the amount that we're using is the same as last year. It's a substantial amount, $946,760. We're able to use those funds. We did have that money in E&D. So the total amount that we're projecting in income,
E&D is what?
Excess and deficiency. It's the equivalent of the member towns free cash. So that's our savings. So in case that there's some type of emergency that we don't have funds within, that something comes up that's not budgeted in our budget, we have those funds available to us in case of an emergency, because we can't come back to the towns and ask for additional funds. Okay. Okay. So if you look at the amount of income that we're projecting, it's a slight decrease from prior year of about $32,000. So we get down to the total operating budget. The total operating budget is at 2.06%, and it's an increase of about $500,000 compared to last year's budget. And then we get down to the construction debt service, and that's the debt that we need to pay, and that's for the projects that we have previously done at the high school, the windows and roofs, as well as the roof at the middle school. And in addition to bond anticipation notes that we expect to take out next fiscal year for the high school building renovation. So we anticipate, we have budgeted for approximately $9 million of bond anticipation notes at a rate of 1%. So that's included in that $364,659. And that's an increase from the prior year because we have those bond anticipation note interest. Okay, so the debt has increased substantially, and that is the reason why compared to last year. So it's up 42.84%. The capital plan, that increases 2.5% annually. That's the amount that's allotted by the member towns to the district to cover any capital projects in the upcoming year. And then finally, the total assessment, we see an increase of $615,474, and that is a 2.49% increase. Any questions on the operating budget for the region?
Anyone? A question that was asked a couple meetings back, I want to say. There was a generic question that was asked, I think, by a member of the committee here, about whether Truro and Provincetown would ever or might ever join the region, such that they wouldn't pay tuition, but they would be part of the region. And I think Tom and I maybe spoke about that at one point, but there was a more general concern, and I think you probably fielded a number of these concerns in the run-up to the vote on the high school renovation, which is how stable is the population in the high school and the middle school likely to be over 10, 15, 20 years? And will it be used for other things? And will students come from other places? And also with COVID, how many are leaving to go do other things? There's a drop, say, from Truro and Provincetown tuition. Do you see that, for example, as being students going somewhere else who might otherwise have come to the high school? And are they now looking at charter schools or tech high school or other? And so it's just a broad question of the school population and where you'll get your revenues from in the long term. And are you seeing any direct impact from this past year of remote schooling and people looking at other options? I know it's a big question, but hopefully it's coherent.
So, Fred, Tom Conrad, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So let's talk just briefly about your first point relative to Provincetown and Truro. And during those negotiations, we did have quite a bit of conversation around having conversations about the future in terms of enrollments and the possibility of eventually having some interest possibly in joining the region. And so that was what we thought was somewhat of a breakthrough in terms of at least everyone recognizing that possibility in future discussions over the next couple of years. We are anxious to continue to watch what our pre-registration numbers are relative to both the high school and the middle school. Although I can tell you they are very, very similar to what we've seen the last couple of years. And so I'm not anticipating much of a drop-off at all in terms of our enrollment as we go into the next school year.
Oh, thanks. Longer term, I mean, I know we've talked about the demographics on the Cape and whatnot over time. And I believe you also spoke about possibly using the newer high school as a more general learning center, not just for.
Sure.
And would that be a source of revenue, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. First of all, we participated through the collaborative with all the superintendents on Cape Cod, trying to understand any trends relative to decreasing populations and so forth. And there was some discussion that you could look at the entire Cape and quite possibly see a decline on a yearly basis of up to 2% of the students on the Cape. And so we're watching those numbers to see if indeed that's going to be a trend that we need to build in the future. But in the meantime, you know, as we have moved forward with the high school building project, we are definitely moving forward with a different approach in terms of that facility over the next 40 to 50 years. And we absolutely believe it needs to be far wider than our approach with just a high school. And we're very, very interested in that being a community learning center for all of our residents and students across the Nauset district. And our vision would have really the opportunity to see a community school that welcomes and finds programming that would include intergenerational courses and other opportunities to mix opportunities in our arts and anywhere that we have open seats. And I think that is really a very, very important piece that that school would be in a position to, I think in the future, work with some type of higher education to provide programs out of there for the region towns, including Wellfleet, who is the farthest away from some of those services. And I think the other critical piece for us is picking up and starting new with adult education and other programs that everyone could take advantage of throughout the district. So it's far bigger than just a high school program and 180 days and open for 7 hours a day. So we're really excited to see that that change.
Thank you, Tom.
Uh,
Giovanni, I didn't mean to, I'm sorry. Kath-
Can I just say, thank you, Tom. That's exciting to hear because when I look at the landscape of businesses right now, there's a learning gap so I think that's a really thinking outside of the box kind of approach to the fixed cost to an education system to bring in some adult learning and maybe partner with some of the businesses that are here that need to do some tech training with their employees. That would be a spectacular place to look to add revenues to cut down on capital costs.
Absolutely.
And there's an absolute need for that as companies are downsizing their footprint to look for some technical assistance or training opportunities in your physical location. So that's really cool. Thank
you very much. I'm as excited as you are for it.
Yeah, that sounds great. I love it.
We lived in Orange County, New York before we moved here. And my wife was the head of the Board of Cooperative Education job development program there. And what they did as much as anything else was get grants so that major corporations coming in who wanted to move facilities or build plants in Orange County would have a ready workforce. So whether it was forklift operation or whatever the heck it was, they would have training programs so that the workers were ready when the plants got built. It worked out very well.
So I think you're right, Fred. And you know, an example, we've been working with the Children's Place in terms of working with teenagers who are interested in going into that field because there's such a shortage of people who can work in our early education programs. And the sky's the limit in terms of what we can service in terms of looking at it from a community facility, not just a high school.
Giovanna, I'm sorry, think we kind of derailed you at the end of page 1, but
Quite all
you know,
right.
like I said, it's a loose structure. Do you want to go on to page 2 of that document? There were
Sure.
I don't think any questions relative to page 1 that were outstanding.
On page 2, we show what the prior year assessment, debt, and capital projects and the operating assessments were for each of the 4-member towns. And then we get into what the FY22, the enrollment for Wellfleet. We have 155 students. The assessment percentage is based on the total number of students that we have, the 1,200 figure. So that comes out to a 12.9167%. The debt assessment is $47,102. The capital plan projects is $72,244, and the operating assessment is $3,149,296. So for a total assessment for Wellfleet, it's $3,268,642. If you look at the difference between fiscal 21 and 22, Wellfleet saw a decrease of 1 student. However, the debt assessment has increased by $13,886. The capital plan projects has increased by $1,248. The operating assessment has increased by $41,113 for a total increase from fiscal 21 to 22 is $56,247.
Did the debt assessment go up like that because you've taken on more debt in anticipation of the renovation and all?
That's correct. We have $90,000 projected for interest on the bond anticipation notes of borrowing $9 million.
Anybody have any questions? Okay. Is there a page 3? I believe there is.
Yep, there's a page 3. On page 3, we detail the revolving accounts that we will be using to offset the expenses in the region-only budget. So when I talked about the region-only budget previously, that number is net of the revolving accounts that we will be using to cover some of the costs in the region-only budget. So the revolving accounts that we're anticipate that we will be using for expenses in fiscal 22, we'll use funds from circuit breaker revolving account. And so we are projecting to receive $930,600 of circuit breaker funds. So those funds will be used to cover special education expenses, out of district costs. The school choice revolving fund, we're anticipating receiving $1,276,000, and that's based upon 232 school choice students with a blended rate of $5,500 to derive that number. Typically, we receive only $5,000 for choice students, but we also have students that require special education services. So there's a differential that the state pays us for those services. Okay, and then we have, we're anticipating using funds from Cape Cod Tech revolving fund, $10,000 for a total of $2.2 million of coming expenses that we will charge directly to these revolving accounts in fiscal 22.
Cool. The decrease in the school choice revolving fund, does that reflect students going to, I assume it means students either staying at home or going to other schools, perhaps not traveling as far to get to the region, or?
No, those are students coming to Nauset from other districts. So that's the revenue that we anticipate receiving from those school choice students.
So if that revenue has dropped, then fewer students are coming.
That's correct. We looked at what we had budgeted in the prior year versus the actual that came this year, and then we reduced accordingly. We anticipate less coming.
And any idea why fewer students are coming, or is it COVID related, or is it something else?
Superintendent Conrad, did you want to answer that?
So as you know, we have some students that come a long ways to take advantage of the great, what I believe to be a great educational program. I spoke to a family. Here's a perfect example, Fred. They had a freshman who was going to be coming under the choice program from Marston Mills. And we feel a lot better about what's happening today than we did a year ago when we were dealing with an absolute nightmare with the virus and so forth. And they decided, because I had a conversation with them, they decided that they wanted to keep their son closer to home this year with everything going on. And we're hoping that when things settle down, he would be able to come back and be a sophomore at Nauset. And so that's not untypical of people who were outside the district and considering coming to Nauset for the choice program.
Yeah, I think that that's talking to a friend that this was going to be the year of ish. It's going to be normal-ish, safe-ish. You know, we're not going to be back to complete normal just yet.
Yeah, I agree.
Anyone have any questions? Giovanna, I think that was a pithy and succinct, and I think pithy and succinct are closely related, an educational presentation. And I hope it's good for you that you didn't have to do the usual deep dive, because last year I think it was like pulling teeth for you to like have to go through every line item when we were anticipating the high school renovation as part of the thing. Anyone have any other questions for either Giovanna or Tom? Well, I can't speak for the finance committee. I'll just speak for myself on this. Tom, thank you for your service. I mean, I know because I was the school liaison for the committee, we've had a number of conversations about how difficult getting this project off the ground was and how much negotiation there was with the MSBA and so on and so on. And, it's done.
Yeah.
Lobsters.
So I just want to finish, I have been in the district for 27 years, either as a high school principal or the superintendent of schools. And I feel like I have been blessed to work in such wonderful communities who were so supportive of education and gave us the opportunity to take our programs to the highest levels in the state of Massachusetts and even some national recognition. So kudos to all of you for the hard work that you're doing to make budgets work in various areas, particularly in education. And you should be really, really proud. I'd like to leave you with one of my great highlights of this past year in terms of the efforts that were made. We have passed now from day one, we were serving meals to families and citizens in our communities who were struggling. We have passed the 2 million meal mark in terms of the number of meals we have put out in our 4 towns. And so that's a perfect example of people going up and beyond to make sure we take care of each other. And thank you very much for everything you've done.
Thank you for attending and for hanging in there so we could get you involved tonight.
Oh, no problem, Fred. Thanks so much.
Thanks for answering the phone. I appreciate your answering the phone, Tom.
Yeah, no problem at all. It was good, as always.
Thank you, Giovanna.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for the schools. And now I'd like to welcome Jim Hood, Water Enterprise Fund, and thanks for coming, Jim. You're on mute. I don't know if you knew that, but
I think I'm okay now.
yeah.
Hi,
So
Jim.
welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Lisa. So, it's been kind of a crazy time trying to get budget together. And unfortunately, I've seen the last iteration that I saw of the draft budget for the Water Commission was essentially the same as last year. No significant increases. The only thing was that at that time, when I saw the first time that I saw it, it did not have a general fund contribution. Now I understand that that has been recommended by administration to the amount of 84,000 and change for the general fund contribution to balance our budget. And as you may recall, that's been something that we've needed year to year, and particularly in the last year or two because of some major expenses that occurred. One, the lightning strike that occurred last year that took out one of the wells at the Boy Scout campsite, well site near the senior center. And the second was that there was also a well that went the first #1 well that went out of service at the Coles Neck well site that failed, and that we had to replace that. So those were major expenses for the Water Commission. But this year that we're not forecasting that. I mean, I think we're facing in this year the work that we're facing this year is essentially around the installation of the new water main that's coming from that we had planned from the Coles Neck well site down to through the center of town, and this would support the housing project on Lawrence Road, and that was our major goal, to be able to provide sufficient water for that project there. That was done, as you know, with the $2.5 million grant that we have from Mass Works. So the balance of that was anticipated to be about $1.3 million. And we don't have numbers, the absolute numbers yet, because it has not gone out to bid, but hopefully it will within the next month or so. We're going to be meeting with environmental partners who've done the design work on this, and we're hopeful that we will have a plan in place to go out for requests for proposals and select a contractor to do the work, and hopefully begin that work as soon as the fall. So,
Jim, just to be clear, if I understood what you're just saying, the entire project will be 3.8 million, or give or take. 2.5 million is coming through Mass Works, and we are estimating another roughly 1.3, but we'll know once we get a contractor to actually.
exactly. Right. And that's what the town has kind of put into their budget at this point for the expectation of what we might need to borrow. That with the authorization, which was approved, as you may recall, at town meeting last year. So,
But that number might be fungible a little bit. It might go up or down depending on the contract.
yes, and depending upon a couple of other things, one of which is that and I'm going to be meeting with Charlie Sumner tomorrow morning about this matter of that the meters for the system currently have been managed by Mueller, the company Mueller, and they are no longer going to be taking care of that. And in fact, have given us essentially told us last year that they would no longer be doing that. So we're going to have to replace the meters on the system. And we anticipate that the cost of that will be about $145,000. And so I'm going to be talking with Charlie tomorrow about how we can fund this. If we have authorization for borrowing, since it is essentially a capital cost associated with improving the water system, if we can use the part of the funding that was authorized for the installation of the water system, for that new water main, to cover that 145,000, for example. That would, obviate the need to take this back to town meeting, hopefully, to get approval for that.
So the thinking would be then that you could essentially borrow from something that's already been allocated. And then if you need to come back next year for the additional 145,000 or whatever, it would be a separate request in FY23.
Exactly, yeah. But it's 100, we anticipate it would be 145,000 over 3 years, according to what Whitewater, our water system operator, has told us would be the anticipated cost for installation of new meters in town.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions for Jim? Well, let me ask the dumbest possible question I can think of, okay? So there's an article in the warrant that the finance committee is expected to weigh in on, which is, yeah, we recommend or not, the Water Enterprise Fund, or, the article associated with it. What exactly are we, since the other monies were allocated last year for the main, what, from a financial perspective, in terms of at least ballpark, what are we voting on this year? Because I didn't see it in the article. Maybe I haven't read it yet. What is incorporated in that article?
Approval of the general fund contribution. I believe it's 80. I don't have the paperwork in front of me, but I believe it's 84,000 or something in that neighborhood for whatever the shortfall is between revenues and expenses.
So that's what the normal vote would be in any given year. That's usually what
Yeah,
we vote on.
but it hadn't been added in because of concerns about the problems with the budget up to this time.
Okay, so there will be a real number attached to that by town meeting anyway, I guess.
Yes, and Fred, I'm hopeful that that it's going to be less, because for another reason, as many of you may know, over the last several months, we've had more people in town, more homes open during the pandemic. So I think we're going to find that usage fees are going to have increased over this period due to people being here in Wellfleet who wouldn't normally be here during the off season.
Are you seeing more connections as well, or no?
There are, we've had a few new connections, people hooking up to the system, and requests. We're trying to be very careful about how we handle that, because they're in areas that we don't have full service at this point, but let's make arrangements with those neighborhoods that they would cover the costs associated with any expansion of the system in on their roads, for example, and with some sort of reduction in the connection fees. If we charge a $6,000 connection fee to a property that's on the line already, and if this is a request to install a connection in an area that's adjacent but doesn't have a connection readily available, if they're willing to pay for the cost to bring the water from wherever the main is to their property or to their street, that we're looking at that as a way to consider how we could manage this. Of course, this is all part of what we see as a need to better define the financial plan as to how the water system operates. And that's something where and maybe this is the next step in the process that we would like to talk to you folks about. We did have authorization back in 2019 for consultant fees to talk about the establishing, updating the financial plan for the water system, but also for revising connection fees and and also usage fees for the system to make it more financially viable for the town.
Yeah, Mo, yeah.
I'm recalling years ago, I was on the Board of Water Commissioners with the initial design of the current system. And one of the things we had thought about and rejected was a fee for homes where the system went by it, regardless of whether they chose to get connected to the system. The fact that they had access to it would impact the value of their home, and it was the conversation, it was never done, but the conversation was around encouraging people to join the system to lower the costs to town. Has that ever been considered again as an
Oh,
option?
yeah, absolutely. And I would say one of the things associated with that is that, and forgive me on this, because I don't recall all the names of all the folks who were involved with this, but we had a lieutenant in the fire department who did a lot of work on establishing the fire protection districts for the town. And I know that at least several years back, there was an understanding that the town, because of the work that he did, that they had expanded the area that was considered, quote, protected to include essentially most of the town. And that meant reduction in insurance premiums due to the fact that there was a coverage for fire protection. Unfortunately, that within the last 2 years, that has changed. And I can speak to this personally because I know my own fire protection insurance changed within the last 2 years. Because of that I am no longer within that distance of 1,000 feet from a hydrant that on the system. So I think that what it is that those folks who are within that protected range, which means if they are in an area that where there is a water main, if it passes in front of their house or within 1,000 feet of their house, they do get a reduction, or they are available. They essentially can request a reduction in insurance premiums for fire insurance coverage for their property.
So Jim, to the point of the question that you just asked, I don't want to speak again for the committee. I think we can certainly discuss it. Obviously, we're not a policy setting board, so I mean, it's not, in our province to talk about the overall strategy for expanding the water enterprise or the system, and whether there ought to be pipes running out to every part of town or not. But to the degree that it makes sense, I think it might be possible for the finance committee to engage on the questions of the financial aspects of it. Like just this, I remember those conversations about a betterment tax that Mo was just referring to. I think they were still being had when I joined the finance committee about 6 years ago. And I think it was maybe one of the first meetings I ever attended that was kind of out there. It was like, and there was never, as far as I could tell, much appetite in town administration to impose a betterment tax for a variety of reasons, obviously. So we can have that conversation, as a committee, and if it makes sense, we'll get together and, we're going into our lean months right now this summer. Sometimes we don't meet this summer, but there might be a possibility to have that conversation. One question I have in my mind, because, and in part because we've had so many meetings with the wastewater commission as well, it always seems to me, and I know that we have one of the wastewater articles that survived the cuts this year is the 95 Lawrence Road article. The thinking being that if you're going to run water out to 95 Lawrence Road, you have to have a way to dispose of it as people dispose of it. So
Right.
it does seem to me that there's a connection between water in and water out, that if you're going to build out a water system, you're also going to have to think about the other aspect of it. I don't know how much you get involved in that, or if you guys have conversations with the wastewater people, but it seems to me that there's some connection there.
Yeah, well, as you may know, Kurt Felix is on both, is part of the wastewater commission as well, and he's also on the water board. And I mean, this is something that we talk about frequently. And
Mhm.
looking at Kurt and I, as well as other members of the water commission, look at this as something that where it's really where there is a clear need for having somebody within town administration who's responsible for this infrastructure or the need for this, you know, because it's only going to get more intense going forward. I mean, we have a relatively small water system at this point. It's going to increase with the Lawrence Road project. And I think that we're going to need to be prepared to deal with this going forward, that it can't be done by a group of volunteers. It needs to be, or at least volunteers with the support of a department, such as whether it's DPW or the Department of Health, wherever, but we do need that. We're getting big enough at this point where that needs to happen.
Okay, Jeff, you raised your hand first and then Kathy, okay?
Sure. Let me just sort of, hi Jim, if I can just sort of clarify, what we're really saying here is we've all known for a long time that the water system has to be subsidized by the town. And we're subsidizing it this year for $84,214. And we're kind of coming to an acceptance that this is just going to be a regular line item that we have to anticipate each year. Am I correct in that?
Correct, unless we're able to significantly increase the number of properties on the system.
Okay. And I guess the other was, you're going back when I think Justina was the water, we sort of heard, and it's the combination between the water and the wastewater. Do you right, other than, I mean, we sort of, I feel like we're at a stable point. Do you anticipate anything disastrous potentially coming up in the next, 1 to 2 years in the water system?
God, I'd love to be able to say to you, no, but I never anticipated a lightning strike at the Boy Scout camp well site that resulted in taking out one of the wells there, or having a failure of a well at the backup well site in north of town. So I mean, it's hard to tell that, we don't have, and Jeff, the reality is we don't have a sufficient or significant reserve fund to help us with this in the event of those kinds of emergencies.
So that's something that we, going forward, would probably try to want to look at.
We have been looking at that. We've been asking about this over the last several years of what happens when we don't spend the full amount of our budget from year to year. Does it stay with us? And what I learned last year was, no, it doesn't. If we're getting a general fund contribution for the budget to the water system, and we don't utilize all of that, and so we're underspending, that money goes back into the general fund because it was a contribution from the town.
It just feels like, because I've seen this come up also, a little bit different, but like I know the Energy Committee was trying to, or Climate Action Committee was trying to get a matching fund, and it's sort of like how our policies don't make it easy for us at a town meeting to allocate matching funds, not knowing whether or not they're going to come in, and then what happens if it passes. we seem to have an issue here. This, it seems to have a common set of threats. Don't mean, we don't have to focus.
No,
but
I know.
sometimes I get through this.
Oh, Fred, can I jump in?
Yes, please, Kathy.
So, yeah, Jeff, I get where you're coming from, but there shouldn't be on something. I don't think there should be a matching fund, but that's a later discussion. You know, anything that's running at a deficit, we should, you know, be aware of it and move from free cash every year. So that notwithstanding, that is not my question. Hopefully lightning will not strike twice and we will not have to fund over and above what the anticipated cost of doing this is. But my question just is really basic, and Jim, I don't mean to put you on the spot because I know there's a lot going on, but I have a nagging little question in the back of my mind. Originally anticipating a June 5th annual town meeting, is there, and this, I don't want you to feel uncomfortable with this question, but is there a reason that the selectmen, I know why the TA hasn't proposed a budget. Generally, when we see the budgets, along with a TA budget and a selectman budget. Is there a reason the selectmen have not addressed your budget at this point?
Um,
And I don't, if you feel like you're on the hot seat, you can say yes or no. And
Well, I am on the hot seat, but I would like to share my concerns about it. I can tell you, I had been asking for year-to-date budget figures back in December. We had no idea of what the water system was spending, because we knew that there were unusual expenditures associated with failures of system. As many of you know, there was an issue with, there was an E. coli outbreak, which cost the town money. I didn't know what that was actually costing us. I asked for reports. Can you tell us what the budget to year-to-date budget numbers are? So I started back in December on this, and I had been repeatedly asking for this through up to, I would say, last month. Okay, I have not given up. I hadn't given up on this. I was totally frustrated about this, and I don't think it's fair to suggest that the Water Commission, failed to do their duty. We tried, but we couldn't get numbers from the town. And I know that this was not, we're not isolated in case in this, but it's an important infrastructure for the town, the water system. And we're not supported by a specific department. We're not part of DPW or Department of Health, that's an issue. And I think Kurt, if he were here with us tonight, would share this with me, that water system and wastewater needs representation and administration within the town.
So I didn't mean at all to suggest that was in any way, shape or form your fault. I think what this comes down to is, again, we're looking at a budget that we know it needs to be funded. I mean, there's not a discussion of whether we're going to fund this budget or not, or whether we need to approve this budget or not, because these are the numbers. This is what's happening. This is real and it has to be done. I just think we don't have a clear picture of what that expenditure and transfer is from free cash, and your department is certainly not alone in that quest, but I appreciate your candor on that. So thank you very much for answering that.
You're welcome.
Thank you. If anyone has any other questions for Jim, it's a good time to ask them. Otherwise, I want to thank you for your presentation. Yeah.
I
Sure.
don't have a question, but I do have a comment. And that is that, again, Jim, you are such a soldier in this community, and we are so grateful for all the work you do.
I agree.
May I respond?
Sure.
I would say, I'm not on the water system, but I fully support the need for, a water system here in the town of Wellfleet. We must have it. And we need to make sure that it works for the town and that it protects the town as well. One of my major concerns is, and believe me, I've gone to bed many nights concerned about whether or not we're going to have a problem with this system here, because I don't know who to turn to within the town for that support.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Well, with that, there are no transfers. And there's no
Is there
correspondence.
anything, Fred, is there anything to transfer from? I'm sorry, go ahead.
We will have that pizza party eventually
No,
in person. Yes, well, okay, so,
I didn't mean to open the can of worms. Go ahead.
well, no, I mean, in closing, there are a couple of things I need to communicate with you. And then we can close. First one is I'd like to set our next meeting for June 9th, Wednesday, June 9th. I know that's a little earlier than we had said, but given when town meeting is on the 26th and the possibility, I hope, only the possibility that we might have to have 2 meetings in June ahead of town meeting, I'd like to get one in early-ish. And June 9th is early-ish, it's 2 weeks out. The reason one of the reasons anyway, that I wanted to push it forward a little bit is that without getting into, too much of the gory detail, you may recall that at the last couple of meetings, concerns were raised about what the role of the finance committee would be as an advisory board if we don't have real numbers to react to. And as this transition, I'll call it, from what was to what was going on and kind of happening in real time, starting in, I guess, late March, early April, and continuing to now, which involved the replacement of the TA, the accountant, going through an interim TA to an acting TA and so on, or an acting TA to an interim TA, Charlie Sumner. There have been a lot of questions around what should we be doing as a finance committee, and the generic advice I was getting from many places, and I won't list who all of them were, was wait. Just wait until things were clear, until we have real numbers. And if you'll recall at our last meeting, we even discussed whether we should be more proactive in providing advice or advisory services. And the general flavor of the meeting was, no, let's wait until we have something better to react to. So that is starting to be the case now. There is a warrant. The warrant went to press 2 days ago, I think. I had the opportunity to meet with Charlie Sumner yesterday, and he will be at our next meeting. And I got the most current version of the warrant a couple of days ago. And well, that's a nice looking cat. I should bring my cat sometime too. We can do dueling cats.
Bring him.
He looks like a big boy. Mine is 20 pounds. How big is yours?
That's not a question I want to talk about in the FinCom here.
Fair enough. In the current warrants, now you may recall that at our last meeting, we voted on the articles that we felt we were confident we could actually vote on, many of which we had already voted on, which were capital requests going back to last October. And then a couple of the pro forma ones. The ones we didn't vote on, for example, were the operations budget, the capital budget, and so on. Some of those are still being cobbled together. There will not, as far as I know, there will not be an absolute number attached to free cash by the time town meeting happens. And there are some other questions like that in terms of, Jim just mentioned one right now. He doesn't know for sure what the number will be for the water enterprise fund just yet. A lot of things are still there, but they'll get clearer as the month goes on, I'm convinced. I'm going to meet with Harry Tarkany tomorrow, in part because in the latest warrant, there are 11 brand new articles that we've never seen before, and they cover all kinds of interesting stuff. I'm apologize if I don't remember if we distributed the latest warrant to you all.
I think
Did you get? Oh, yeah, I thought so. If you look in there,
Today, yeah.
yeah, so if you look in there, there's
Yes.
the obvious stuff like the water enterprise fund, but there's one called prior year invoices. There is the Wellfleet Harbor Flora and Fauna Survey, that would be article number 26. Disposal of dredging spoils, article number 25. And then articles 41, 44, and 48, which are dense and long. And I don't yet know what they imply, but they all want a finance committee opinion. So for that reason, I'm going to meet with Harry, and we'll have Charlie at our next meeting. And hopefully between those two events, we will have clear explanations, which I'll provide to you ahead of the meeting, on what it is we're actually voting on. So that with any luck, we will be able to get through the outstanding articles. There were 22 outstanding articles. Many of those are gone. Most of the wastewater articles that we were looking at when we talked to Kurt at our last meeting are gone. There's only 2 left. So I need a day or so to suss out the current warrant. I would welcome you guys to do the same thing and get back to me with any questions you have about what's in there that is in any way confusing or concerning or whatnot. I will try to work the other side of the street over the next couple of weeks and insert the finance committee appropriately, Ira, because I know you once said we're not a policy setting board. Totally agree, but there has to be an appropriate role for us in being an advisory board as all this kerfuffle goes down, and we're trying to figure out what kind of advice we should be giving and when, at a time when everybody's got their hair on fire and things are changing and we're trying to calm things down. So I think the mantra right now is we're calming things down. We've got good people in place. I'm confident after talking with Charlie that he's going to be a very, very competent interim TA. And he's got a couple of accountants working with him, one of whom, Lisa Souvet, has been working on the accounts for a while. So there's every reason to think this will work itself out, but it won't happen by the end of June. We are looking at months and months and months of this being sussed out.
I wonder.
I'm sorry?
I wonder if in the questions that you eventually ask, you may ask how much it's going to cost the town to straighten out this mess. Because I think that that's really interesting for us to know. I mean, somebody dropped the ball somewhere and this is going to cost a lot of money. How much? I think that, and how's it going to get paid for?
That's a great point.
It's a great question. I don't think, I'm going to talk just off the top of my head here. I'm going to say, I don't know. Okay?
Of course not. I know. There's just all these extra accountants and stuff. It's just ridiculous. I'm sorry to say it's very expensive. I mean, that's all.
And there are aspects to what the answer to your question will be that come at it from different places. There were ban loans back in 2019. There were expectations or anticipation of revenues this past year that in some cases were met and in some cases came up short. There are expectations of revenues going forward in 2021 that nobody really knows yet what the pot shops will produce and so on. So, and even just getting an accurate number from the DOR or at least a certification of free cash will take some time. And for all of those reasons, I don't think anyone will come forward and say, here's the number.
Sure.
That ballpark is probably the best we're going to get for now. And how to fund the budget when you don't know the actual numbers is an open question. But I think guesstimating is going to be the rule of the day for a little while. I hope we have enough money to do this. And it'll be like that. I think we're going to hear that from every department. There's no department heads who won't say, They tried to find out what their actuals were and, expenses year to date, and couldn't get those reports or couldn't get an accurate read on those numbers. Because the system wasn't working well enough to provide those numbers accurately.
Fred, in the beginning, the beginning of the year, we were working with a woman named Miriam. We haven't seen her.
Quick.
Well, Miriam is the treasurer.
Oh,
Miriam's-
she's the treasurer. Okay.
Yeah, so we were working with her on the cash flow issue that was derivative of the fact that town meeting was late, and off town meeting, you set the tax rate, and then basically how you can send your tax bills out, essentially. So the tax bills weren't going out on time, and bills were accruing, and there was a race to a point in December, I want to say the first week of December, where the town was either going to run out of money or it wasn't, or we would have to do a short-term borrow or we wouldn't. The good news was they got that together with the help of, I'm sorry, I forget his name, from Eastham. And they were able to get the tax bills out and the money rolled in. And so disaster or issue averted, not disaster, that's too strong a word, but you know what I mean. That was a December issue, a November, December issue. But Miriam normally wouldn't be involved in the accounting questions. I don't think.
So Fred, with everything that you've just said, I did have a chance to just peruse really quickly over the new warrant. And I have to say that I'm disappointed because we have asked nobody knows what the actual numbers are. Nobody knows. And I was really disappointed that I'm sure every department head is under a great deal of stress to cut to the bare bone in anticipation of the worst case scenario. And there were some warrants that put on there that didn't seem to me to meet a certain requirement for urgency on the town. And I, where we're kind of sitting on pins and needles and we don't know whether we're going to have, big red parentheses around some big hairy number at the end of the day. I didn't think that we pulled articles off and then added some that were, in my mind, not urgent. So I'm just going to leave it at that and say we should just, have to be for a while and clench our teeth and hope that everything works out okay, I mean, our bond, this could affect our bond rating.
Yeah, and Kathy, I'm not inclined to cast aspersions when you don't even know what the actual the actual facts are. But I do think that it is time for us committee.
Over in those spots or down in the basement?
Sarah,
Not my house.
you should mute yourself.
No. I'm just making the rule.
Huh?
Let's see.
I think Sarah's doing business.
So yeah, I don't want to be casting a dispersion on anybody or understanding that. I'm just telling you what my general sense is when I read it. I'm not trying to point fingers at anybody. It wasn't my intention to, if anybody thought I was trying to pinpoint, I just wanted to feel Jim's experience in that. And I'm not trying to finger point, lay blame or anything else. I'm just saying going forward, it was hard for me to look at that. And
I think you'll see that in every department budget, that every revised department budget, you're going to see what we just saw in the school budgets, that they somehow magically ended up at 2.5%. You know that there has to be some manipulating going on to get everyone to be 2.5%. People are playing, good games, but they're still balancing. It's a balancing act, right? Everybody's budget that we've talked to this year was trying to level fund or decrease if they could, push off capital requests if they could. That's why a lot of the articles that we looked at in the last warrant a month ago, was it only a month ago, are gone. Because some things are getting pushed off into 2023 because nobody knows if the money's actually there to pay for them necessarily. And rather than risk that it's not there, push it off if you can, or put it into other funds. I understand, and I don't have all the details, but I understand some things ended up, for example, one of the fire trucks ended up in the ambulance fund because it can pay for it. So that's a way to pay for that fire truck that was going to be a capital request, and which we had approved back when we looked at the capital budget in October. But this is, like I said, this is a moving train at this point. I think the train has slowed down a little bit, though. It was a fast moving train a month ago. It feels to me like there's a steadier hand at the tiller, but that doesn't mean that the train's going to stop anytime soon. It just means that we've got competent people working on it. But I also think that the finance committee needs to ask those harder questions, that we need to be a little more engaged on this, that we can't just sit back and wait either.
I think
Yeah.
after, sorry, Fred. I think after the summer and we get into like our slow season of the fall, before budget season, we as a committee really ought to be asking, is there anything that we should have been asking? Is there anything we should have known? And is there anything that we can know in the future? Like, should we be asking questions about free cash, or are we just being too passive? And is there any way that we could have alerted, or, so I just feel like we've kind of dropped the ball, that even though we don't set policy, if we could have figured out that this disaster was coming. I don't know if that's possible, if we could have asked something, but that's something as a committee we might want to ask ourselves after the summer.
Well, let me just say, I put this out to each of you individually to think about I've gotten a lot of calls over the last 2-3 weeks about the role of the finance committee. And you know, we are an advisory board per the charter. A lot of people look at the state guidelines and think we are the other kind of finance committee that owns the budget, that is in direct line with the accounting, and we are not that. And we probably will never be that. And we interfere, or we insert ourselves into that process at our risk, because it's a lot more work. If you want to talk to the accountant on a regular basis and find out what's going on a month-to-month basis with town finance, we are assuming a somewhat different role than we have historically done. And that can be a very slippery slope. This is an extraordinary time, and I don't want to assume that because it's an extraordinary time that we should change our role radically. We are not and have never been in direct line with the accountant. I remember
I just call on me when you're finished.
I was just going to say, we met Gene Ferrari once at our request.
And that
And
was
it's
the
like-
moment that everybody sitting in that meeting understood that this thing was not working, because I don't even remember the man's name. He was introduced, he was in way over his head. I think that was obvious to everybody who was sitting in that meeting. I don't know why it wasn't obvious to the previous town administrator, but that is the moment when you saw this entire thing start to careen off the wheels, in my opinion.
Well,
So
yeah.
we were there, but what could we do about it?
Well, and to that point, in hindsight, we can say that, but the assumption, at least my assumption, has been the accountant reports to the town administrator. If the town administrator is on top of town accounts, right, then they're having that interaction. And if the accountant is doing his or her job, they are reporting that there are discrepancies or issues or whatever. I remember clearly that Gene said the transition to the Vadar system was going to be a really knotty thing. But that by itself doesn't fully describe where we're at right now.
I beg to differ, as I understand the whole thing, it's directly related to that.
Oh, it is, but I don't know that we could have predicted it then.
No, of course, I'm saying that we were there when it started, but we had no role in doing anything about
I
it.
agree with that.
I
Yeah, Mo,
remember
you wanted to say
him
something?
I remember him walking into that meeting and saying, we don't know what the balances are. And I remember looking around the table saying, and this was my quote, because it's reverberated in my head, is anyone else concerned about that? But there is a whole other management structure of professionals that should have picked that up. I mean, this gentleman talked to us for 15 minutes. Why weren't the people that were managing him or that were working with him on this in there? And again, I'm not trying to point fingers.
Right.
I'm just saying, I don't think any one of us on this committee should feel at all responsible, because we're advising on what we're given. And there is another mechanism for the checks and balances of a municipal accounting system. And
to that
right now.
To that point, Kathy, I'm sorry, I'll give you 1 second, Mo. Every year, the books get audited. And if the auditors say that there are significant, serious issues, then they get raised, they get elevated. If they don't get elevated. And you can like this ball rolls down the hill. You can try to point a finger and say, well, was this, or was that, or was that? All I'm saying here is that as a finance committee, it is time for us to pay attention on this and demand that we get better numbers, because it's time. But that doesn't mean that we need to change our entire process year over year. I still believe that the accountants are going to report to the TA, and it's their responsibilities, along with the other related department heads and all, to do their budgets and to get the right reports out and to make sure that they're running their areas effectively. It's not our job to sit on their shoulders.
Yep.
In any way.
I agree.
Mo.
What occurs to me, and I'm new, so I speak from ignorance, take it with a grain of salt. But we're an advisory group to town meeting as well. And I would, and I think we may be the most trusted group at town meeting in this area. I think it may be incumbent upon us, or for Fred, to speak to town meeting, hopefully to be able to say, we've had our problems, they're getting solved, things are more solid than they were, and we're moving forward. Conversely, it may be incumbent upon us to say, things are in turmoil. We hope they get better. But what I'm saying is, I think it may be our responsibility as an advisory group to town meeting to present it honestly with what we know at the time. And I think that's a conversation we should have before town meeting, and have Fred represent us at town meeting with that kind of statement.
So let me just say this about that. We will have the acting TA at our next meeting. You'll have the opportunity to ask. We will know more after our next meeting than we do now, I guess is the point. We will be able to ask the penetrating questions that you have that will determine whether we have a particular role at town meeting in stating a perspective from the finance committee that may be at odds with the perspective of the select board or whatever, or may not be. It may be that we can say, yep, the palliatives are there, that the solution is in hand, but it's going to take months or whatever. Or we may say, yeah, there's some really systemic issues here that we have to highlight. But I think we need a little more information. I'll get some more tomorrow from Harry, I believe, on the current warrant. And we will get more from Charlie Sumner in 2 weeks at our next meeting. And all I'm going to ask is that you guys be patient on that one and think of your questions. I mean, think of what your concerns are and be prepared to raise them when the time is right, which will be hopefully.
The question I'm asking is how we feel about presenting to town meeting. I'm not talking about presenting to or asking questions of the town administrator. I'm talking about laying out what we know and how much confidence we have or lack to town meeting.
And I'm saying, I don't think we know as much as we will know in a couple of weeks. So we can't speak to the confidence we're going to have about the process until we've had exposure to the people who are running the process right now.
I guess I'm asking, do you see it as our responsibility to report to town meeting about how we feel about the process? That's really what I'm asking.
Well, that's a good question. And I think to some degree, the answer is yes, that if we're not confident that things are getting resolved in a way that will stabilize the finances of the town, especially given the potential, we hear it from Jim, we hear it from the wastewater people, the dredging committee or the dredging task force is still, the whole dredging in the harbor is still not resolved. There are some big ticket items out there that were there out there before, they're still out there. And they're going to cost the town a lot of money. In addition, if we don't have confidence that the basic chart of accounts and budgeting process is stabilizing, not stable yet, but stabilizing. Those are concerns that are worth raising, but I think we need a little more information at this point. Yeah,
First of all, with your permission, I would like to move to adjourn.
yes, I'm gonna
But
give you that permission.
I'd like to say one thing first. I believe that as the FinCom, we're owed an explanation, at the very least, from the chairman of the Board of Selectmen of what is going on. Of all the committees in the town, I really do that we deserve to hear it in their words, because the only thing I know is what I read in the newspaper. And
Unfortunately,
that is not a good thing, good place
All of us.
to learn what is going on. We are owed an explanation. I don't care who gives it. Maybe Mr. Sumner will next week. Perhaps you could ask him to, or whoever. But we look, and I feel like an idiot because have been on the FinCom for 5 years. I don't know what's going on. I say ask Fred. Fred doesn't really know that much.
no,
It's not
and I
so that's
reiterated,
what I believe, and I'm moving to adjourn.
Woody, before I accept that motion, I just will say, I have said exactly the same thing to several people in the last few days. It's not a good thing when the finance committee is getting its information from the independent.
Can I say one quick thing?
Yes,
Trust
Kathy.
would verify, but we have no power to verify. We just have to trust what's brought to us. So if you want to be more responsible, we have to find a way to verify. And I think that that's a good start, Ira, is having somebody who should know, give us an explanation of why this happened.
And I'll follow up on that request, Ira. I have talked to the select board, I won't say who or how, multiple times in the last couple of months. And this is the status of the information we have in spite of those requests.
Okay.
So there it is.
Again, I'm hoping that we can make town meeting, our population, feel more secure going forward. I'm
Good.
hoping that it works to that extent, but we don't know, as you
We'll see.
said.
I have a motion to adjourn. Do I have
And
a
I
second?
second.
Second it.
Does anybody not want to adjourn right now?
I want to do this forever.
Well,
So-
then get your glass of wine and come back in 5 minutes.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Fred.
Great being here with you all.
Good to have you.
Welcome, Mo.
Good to have you, Mo.
Hi, welcome, Mo.